just indicated the...
Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. We are playing replays in the Holly Bobo case, the Zachary Adams trial, I should say more specifically, that was decided a few months ago, where Zachary Adams was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape of 20-year-old nursing student Holly Bobo. This is a case out of Tennessee, and now we know from a status hearing last week that his brother, John Dylan Adams, will be on trial tentatively beginning May 29th. A lot to dissect from that case, but in the meantime, I actually want to talk about a new case that we'll be covering here on the Law&Crime Network, a case out of Florida. This is a nightclub shooting from 2015. There are 3 defendants, Laquan Barrow, Gary King, Michael Smith. They are charged with second-degree murder in the killing of 19-year-old Benetria Robinson, and also attempted second-degree murder, where there's multiple victims in this nightclub shooting. So to talk a little bit more about this case as well as Holly Bobo, luckily we are joined today by criminal defense attorney Adam Sostrin. Adam, good to have you back here.
Yes, luckily I'm here. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So let's talk a little bit about the case tomorrow. We know that there's jury selection going on. We expect opening arguments tomorrow in this case. So obviously we don't have all of the facts, but I want to kind of just try to talk a little bit about what we do know.
Sure.
When you have a nightclub shooting like this, and I think one of the reasons this case kept getting delayed is because they had trouble locating witnesses for depositions. What are the dangers here when you have a nightclub? I'm sure it's loud, and you have all these witnesses who saw this fight break out in the club, and then they move outside of the club, and then there was a shooting. What are some of the dangers there of the witnesses?
Well, of course, there's so many things going on. What could they have been aware of with all the ruckus of all the people that were outside? What were they able to see? What were they able to hear? I'm sure there's all kinds of questions about those things, and that's why the case has been continued, because they want to get depots of as many witnesses as they possibly can. They want to capture all of their memories from that time, and you can't go to trial without having everything, and so that's what's going on.
Adam, you're a great defense attorney. If you were in this case, I can imagine you would have great opportunity to interrogate these witnesses on the stand and say, how much did you have to drink that night? Are you sure you heard what you heard? Weren't you blocked by a number amount of people? So to get eyewitness testimony might not be so easy, and you, an experienced defense attorney, would jump on that, correct?
Sure. I mean, what are they able to observe? Of course, obviously, if they're inebriated, if they had any drugs in their system or anything like that, I'm sure you'd want to find out about those things, or when they began their night, when they ended their night, how long they'd been there for. Those are a couple of things that you'd probably go into.
So you have 3 defendants here, Laquan Barrow, Gary King, Michael Smith. They're all tried at the same time, but King is actually going to have a separate jury from his co-defendants. What do you make of the fact that they're all tried at the same time? This guy's going to get a separate jury. We'll just speak a little bit about that kind of process and what can we expect?
It's sort of interesting. Any single time you have a multiple defendant case, one of the defendants can say, hey, I want my speedy trial. As a result, in the 3-defendant case, it's possible for all defendants to be tried at the exact same time. So that's what's occurring here, because one of them effectively asserted their speedy trial rights. They get their own, apparently, in this system, they get their own jury, and the other 2 defendants get another separate jury.
Now, I don't know if I'm assuming they're not represented by same counsel. If they're represented by separate counsel, are they just going to be pointing the fingers at each other?
They may in fact be. I mean, that's sort of the problem with co-defendant cases. If you have a bank robbery, for instance, one person's going to say, no, I had no idea any of this was going on, and the other person's going to say, sure, you did. We talked about it. You drove him over to the spot. So it's a problem in these cases when you have multiple defendants. There's always inherent conflicts that can come up. Sure.
And I think again, the advantage to them is when you have a noisy situation where there's a lot of people and a lot of commotion, it's not so simple to say who was the first person to fire a gun and who wasn't. Again, we're talking about the case out of Florida, the case of Barrow, King, and Smith. In the early morning hours of September 13, 2015, witnesses claim a fight between 2 women inside the Cloud 9 nightclub out of Florida eventually spilled outside and escalated into Mr. Barrow, King, and Smith shooting into the crowd outside the club. Now, Adam, this is my question to you. The women and Barrow, they continued to fight outside. But apparently, from what we know, the club witnesses claim that Barrow, King, and Smith headed to a nearby pickup truck and returned with handguns. They're charged with second-degree murder, not first-degree murder. But what I just read to you, doesn't that seem like they came back with the intent to kill?
It absolutely does. This is a case, though, I think there were statements with respect to sort of shooting a gun up in the air at random and things like that. And second-degree murder sort of involves a gross disregard, gross recklessness. So they certainly thought that this would be an easier conviction. For it to be premeditated, it's hard to get that conviction. Also, when you have a case of this could sort of be a heat of passion type of thing. It has to be thoughtful. It has to be deliberate. The time period in order to form that premeditation, it can be relatively instantaneous, or it can take a long time. But because there are issues with that, and probably the speed of which the events occurred, which they arose, because obviously, who knows if these people knew each other from anywhere. The fight just broke out. They're thinking, well, it might be difficult for us to get that first-degree murder conviction.
I'm sure the defense attorneys, as a last resort, are just going to try and push for manslaughter, right? They're really going to just try and push for that. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what this is all about. It's about a heat of passion, tempers flared, and that's exactly what occurred.
Is that successful in these kinds of cases where there's fights?
Anytime there's a fight, that is a successful defense, sure.
And I mean, from what we know so far...
Depending on the jury. Yeah.
Right, of course. So that's my next question for you. We know that there's jury selection. If you're on the prosecution side, what kind of jury do you want? And if you're on the defense, what kind of jury do you want?
Well, if I'm the defense attorney on the case, obviously I want a jury that's sympathetic to all things related to the defense. I want a jury that's going to, make the people meet their burden. What does beyond a reasonable doubt mean? I do not want a jury. If I'm a prosecutor, for instance, I just want a jury that's going to sort of nod their heads. This is what the officers said. This is what occurred. Those are the last jurors I want in a case like this. I do want the jurors to pay attention to the fact that, tempers were flaring. This does appear to be some sort of heat of passion issue. And then going into what we were just talking about earlier, I want jurors that are going to pay attention to the fact that, what were these people actually able to observe, all these witnesses with respect to the ruckus, the drinking, all these things. That's the type of jury that I want as a defense attorney.
And I'm sure they're asked whether or not have you ever gotten into a fight? Have you ever gotten into an altercation? Maybe they even asked their experiences in nightclubs? Because look, you go to nightclubs, all right? I don't know. We'll learn more about the details of this.
Now, you're a younger man than me.
Listen, you're not missing much, okay? You're not missing much, but I will tell you this much. You go to a nightclub, I mean, we'll find out more of the details of what happened here and why the fight escalated, but when people are bumping into one another and people are drunk and you're in a crowded situation and it's loud, tempers flare, so I wonder how much jurors are asked those kinds of questions, their experiences in nightclubs and fighting in general.
Sure. Probably maybe the older jurors are going to have less understanding of those things than the younger jurors.
Yeah, and again, age I'm sure is a factor when they determine a jury. We know that
I would be too old to be on this jury. That's what this sounds like.
I don't know about that. So we know that 21 shell casings were recovered. We also know that shots were fired in about 5 seconds. That amount of bullets, that degree of, that time frame when they were shot, does that give you any indication about this crime?
It just seemed to be so immediate. I think it would sort of tie into the defense's argument that this wasn't something that was really thoughtful. This was something that occurred just at the moment that tempers flare. I think that's what I get from that. There were 21 shell casings. There were 21 bullets that were discovered in such a short period of time. It's sort of, I think that gels with the defense's argument that there wasn't anything too thoughtful about what occurred.
And we know that there's at least 5 victims who sustained different injuries from gunshot wounds. They're all young people. I mean, we have 35, 28, 19, 21, 22, really just young people who went out. And then, of course, Miss Robinson, who's 19 years old, she died. They all just went out to enjoy a night, and this is what happened. What do you expect from when victims, if they decide to take the stand, what their testimony will be like?
Oh, I'm assuming it's going to be a gut-wrenching testimony. These are all what would appear to be just innocent people out for a fun evening, and this happened to them. Their lives are forever harmed. Especially with respect to the person who died, Ms. Robinson. It's absolutely terrible. And of course, those second-degree charges homicide charges don't attach to the four people who are still living, because that would be crimes of attempted homicide.
Sure.
So it's different.
Now, Adam, before we move on to our next case, I just have a question about this. Do you anticipate that the defense will try to flavor it in a self-defense kind of argument, maybe even put their clients on the stand and say that this was a situation gone bad, they had to defend themselves, there was threats made? Do you see that happening at all?
With respect to this trial at the nightclub, right?
Yes.
It's possible depending on what evidence there is. I mean, if it's the case that somebody was making threats, of course, that's something you can ask in cross-examination as a leading statement. Isn't it true that this is what was occurring? Or even on a direct statement with respect to some of the witnesses who were present, if any of the people from the girl who was arguing with the defendant's sister made any kind of statements whatsoever, of course that can come into play. Of course you're going to talk about things like that, if it's there. Or if it's not there and then the evidence, appears to support something like that, it might be fair game for cross-examination.
Do you think the defense, this is my final question before we move on to Holly Bobo, do you think the defense is going to bring up the fact that you have underage people at nightclubs? I mean, Miss Robinson was 19 years old, and she was at this nightclub. She was not 21 yet. Do you think they're going to play on that fact at all?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with respect to, what the defendants did in this case. The fact that there had been minors in the club, that definitely would be an issue of liability, though, for the club itself to allow minors to go in. That's sort of an age-old thing. It's timeless.
Yeah. I think they're facing their own sort of legal difficulties as well. I read about that. So, yeah, they have their own issue. It's just a tragic case. You see this young girl and killed, and it's just for no reason. Adam, we're going to move into the Holly Bobo case. I want to show you a little bit what we've been covering today. We've been covering now the testimony of Jason Autry, who was the key witness in the Zachary Adams case. I want to play some of his testimony. I want to get your thoughts about him, as well as what to expect in the upcoming John Dylan Adams case, that trial coming up. So let's turn to that clip now, and we'll be back here with Adam Sostrin.
What's riprap?
It's a large limestone rock, generally about this size.
And you're using your hands to
Riprap changes.
okay. But you're using your hands to show something larger than a dinner plate.
That's correct.
Okay. And you said you stopped beside.
We backed into a pile.
Is this an area that you had been to before?
That's correct.
Is this an area, or do you know whether or not Mr. Adams had been to that area before?
I believe he had.
Well, did you tell him where to turn, or did he know where to go?
He went on his own.
Okay. And you said you backed
Up to a pile
of riprap.
of riprap. There was a pile laying underneath the bridge. The whole underneath the bridge was riprap, but there was some extra piled up to one side.
And how close to the bridge were you all? Did he back his truck up? And I should have said how close to being under the bridge. Like.
Well, it was something like that. I don't know footage-wise. I mean, it wasn't directly under the bridge. I mean, if you're looking at the bridge this way, if you just look straight down off the bridge, it's probably 20, 30 foot off to one side. That's correct.
And there appears to be a barrier. In other words, where you won't go off of it
Right here,
if you're traveling?
right here.
Okay. And is that part of what obstructs your view if you're traveling down that road?
It is that factored in with elevation.
All right. So do you see the pile of, let me ask you this, is this what it looked like then, or does it look different now in this picture?
It looks different in this picture.
All right. What is missing or what is different?
This right here was bigger and was green, like that right there was green.
What do you mean bigger?
There was more rock there.
Okay. Show the whole area where there was rock back when.
It looked, you see how this looks tall? It was all in that fashion running out.
Okay. We can take pictures down and get the lights back up. So when Mr. Adams backed his truck up to the pile of riprap that you just showed the jury,
That's correct.
I want you to start there, please, and tell them what happened.
We backed up to that pile of riprap, approximately the distance of this to that. We didn't back all the way against it.
When you say this to that, you just indicated a small amount. And you're,
The bed of the truck was ridged, like the bed of the truck, and it looked as if it had just lightly skidded over. And the blanket at the upper end of the torso that I grabbed had a small blood spot, maybe the size of an orange.
hands up because I don't think they can see it on here.
Maybe the size of an orange.
Did you look inside the blanket?
Never,
Did you unwrap?
never.
How were you able to swing her body around and you get the top part and Zachary Adams gets the bottom part without unwrapping the blanket?
I grabbed the blanket just like you would this shirt right here. The body didn't weigh very much. I was in pretty good shape. I'm a pretty good sized guy. I grabbed the blanket just like that right there and walked to the tailgate of the truck. At that time, he grabs the legs. We set the body down with the upper torso on that pile of riprap that y'all just showed, that we just discussed.
After you put Holly's body down on the riprap, what happened?
Mr. Adams goes to the driver's side of the pickup. I'm standing over the top of him with my hands upon my knees. She being right here. And at that time, I see the foot move, a movement, and a sound of distress that sound like come out of the voice, come from the blanket. At that time, I walked to the door, to the passenger side door of the pickup, and Mr. Adams was digging in a fanny pack. I told him, I said, this fucking bitch is still alive. We just stopped for a second.
Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. We are showing replays in the Holly Bobo case, the Zachary Adams trial from a few months ago, where he was convicted for first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape of 20-year-old nursing student Holly Bobo. I'm here with Adam Sostrin, criminal defense attorney, talking a little bit about this case. And the reason we're talking about it is last week there was a status hearing in regards to another person who's charged in connection with this crime, John Dylan Adams. And he will be facing a trial in May, again, tentatively set for May 29th. So, Adam, you just saw the testimony of Jason Autry, the key witness in the Zachary Adams case. From anybody who watched it in our perspective, he's evil, really evil, the way he describes dumping the body, hoping the turtles would eat her body, being a lookout while Zachary Adams shot her. Now, we're just taking everything that he says at face value. And if you take it for face value, what he did was really, truly evil. Now, from our accounts, he's going to be, he got an immunity deal, and he might not even face trial for a reduced sentence. But when a jury looks at this and sees him testifying, we saw it in the Zachary Adams case, they believed him. They believed him, right?
Yeah. And there's no reason to think that they won't also believe him in this next trial. The brother, he is the state's witness. He's getting some kind of leniency. We don't know what the offer is. Maybe there hasn't been a specific offer made. I think that's the way it's usually done. But just based on, what the state thinks, if he's giving truthful testimony, he will likely get some leniency in this case.
I don't even think he's going to be put on trial. I mean, they said they won't even schedule until after John Dylan Adams. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm his attorney. I would do exactly what the attorney's doing in this case. I would talk to the prosecutor and say, look, we have a person who can tell you everything that happened from A to Z. We can put him on, and the prosecutor will say, sure. And in exchange for a possible leniency, yeah, that's possible depending on the truthfulness of his statements. And that's exactly what you do in a case like this, because he's not going to go to trial. You don't want him to go to trial because the penalties are so great, right? I mean, he's risking life. So it's not going to happen. Or it's possible to get the death penalty in a case like this, but they're not pulling for that. They gave life without the possibility of parole to Zachary. They would probably do the same to somebody like Autry, were he to have his own trial. So there's no way he's going to trial.
We talked about it a little bit earlier about the family agreed to that no death penalty. And in fact, for John Dylan Adams, the worst punishment he would receive is life in prison, but with the possibility of parole. And the reason is the family has said that they just want some closure, that they want to begin healing. And I think part of that is due to the fact that her remains were found almost 3 years after her disappearance. They can't be returned to the family for a proper burial until after these cases are resolved. And do you see that happening a lot of times in cases where family members just want some resolution?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, in cases like this, when there's a crime charged, everything sort of stays on hold. Including, what happens with the body and including what happens to the lives of the victim's family. It's just awful. I can understand them wanting to put this to rest. Obviously, it would be some kind of justice for him to get with parole as long as that sentence is life. And Zachary got life without the possibility of parole. I think the family's getting what it wants in this case, and it seems like the main culprit, Zachary, he's the person that's really going down in this case. He's the person that made that extra shot. Not to say that the other people aren't just as awful and gruesome and heinous with respect to the raping of Bobo prior to, but the main suspect is Zachary. The family, they got him.
Yeah, he was the shooter, according to Jason Autry. I'm curious, when we were watching his testimony and when people were talking about it, they said, isn't it so convenient that he just came around, Jason Autry, he just came around when it was time to dispose of that body? He had nothing to do with her killing. He had nothing to do with her rape. He had nothing to do with her abduction, but only really to be a lookout when Zachary Adams shot Holly Bobo. Isn't that a little too convenient? What do you think about that stance?
Right. It's absolutely convenient. And as it goes, the prosecutors only get the cards that they're dealt. This is the witness that they have. This is the only eyewitness that they have, so they have to make use of him. Is he believable? Is he credible here but less credible there? Sure, that can happen with any single prosecution case. It's absolutely convenient. Other defendants aren't exactly going to get up on the stand and say what happened.
What do you expect? Do you expect that we'll even have a trial for John Dylan Adams, or do you expect some sort of plea agreement?
I think there might be a plea agreement. Again, the consequences are so great. Obviously, John Dylan Adams he's not the shooter in this case. But I think there'll be some kind of agreement with respect to the fact that he didn't do that. He did make a few statements regarding the case, which turned out to be helpful. And it's my understanding his intellectual capacity is a little bit less so. I wouldn't be surprised if I'm the defense attorney in this case. I want to make a deal with the prosecutor and say, hey, why don't we just avoid all these things? Everything is just so bad. What can you give to me?
You know, he initially brought the authorities to the attention of him and his brother and Jason Autry, as well as Shane Austin, who killed himself and was another suspect in this case.
Exactly.
And, you know, he is now going to be charged in the same kind of crimes for Zachary Adams. You know, according to Jason Autry's testimony, John Dylan Adams raped this girl, and he initially said that he helped dispose of the body and evidence that would have helped investigators find her sooner. So these are some pretty serious crimes, and it's interesting the fact that he was the one who initially started all this.
Right, and I think that's sort of what the family's thinking with respect to the fact that, hey, as long as this guy gets a life sentence, in a way he's sort of done something. Perhaps nothing would be going on right now. There wouldn't be any convictions without the statements that he initially made in this case. Let's put this to rest, despite how heinous his conduct is.
Adam, stick around. I want to play a little bit more of Jason Autry's testimony in the Holly Bobo case, the Zachary Adams case. There's a lot of more things in this case that I want to touch upon and dissect as we do wait for the new case to start of John Dylan Adams, this horrific saga from Tennessee. I mean, it really took the state by storm. It took the country by storm. This young 20-year-old nursing student who disappeared from her home, and then her remains were found almost 3 years later near the home of Zachary Adams. I mean, it really is a horrific story, and people want some sort of conclusion to it. So, Adam, stick around. I want to play a little bit more of the testimony of Jason Autry, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this case.
The Yellow Springs Road. And I said, whoa.
Hey, let me ask you something here. Did you say whoa because you thought you were going to save her life and stop him from doing something bad? Or did you say whoa for another reason?
I said, whoa, for another reason, to go look.
Where'd you go look?
As we showed you on them 3 pictures,
I'm going to put back exhibit 177 up there.
I said, whoa, and I run all the way across here to about this area and looked that way to see if anything was coming.
How far could you see down there?
Maybe 250 yards. It's a long, pretty long stretch from right here to the next curve. Look back around, Mr. Adams was standing.
Let me stop. You said you looked around. Did you stay down there at the corner or did you come back?
I stayed right here working back and forth, watching.
What about looking the other way?
There was nothing coming. I looked back this way and I told him there was nothing coming.
When did you look back the other way? The way that you came in on?
Just shortly after I noticed that I looked down here and wasn't nothing coming.
Okay. You can do the lights. Hang on. All right. You can keep going.
I looked around and I told him that there was nothing coming close as clear, or something to that effect. And at that time, boom, the gun sounded, the gun went off. And it sounded like to me that it shot 3 or 4 times underneath that bridge. I had done made it back. I had done started my way back this way. And it sounded like boom, boom, boom underneath that bridge. It was just one shot, but it echoed underneath that bridge all the way down that damn river bottom. And when that gun went off, there was Martins went everywhere. Martins, bridge, birds went everywhere, just all up under that bridge. And it just dead silence for just a second. I was still in this general location right here. And I heard a boat crank up, a boat running somewhere in either here or over here, somewhere there was a boat. Or either down the Tennessee River was right here. And I took off running back over to the truck, and I told him, I said, God damn, we have been seen or heard. And at that time, Mr. Adams grabs the feet, and I grabbed the same spot at the upper torso. The blood spot was probably the size of a grapefruit at that time. We load the body back into the truck in the same fashion, shut the tailgate, and tear out of there like wild Indians, just driving a racket. And I told him, I said, this is a federal refuge. There's no firearms supposed to be allowed down here. If they see us driving like this, we're going to be the suspects. So we slowed down.
Now, are those the exact words you used? Did you say it that calmly? This is the federal refuge, we will be suspects?
Of course not. I
You
mean,
hit it? You hit it?
yeah.
Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Fucked her.
So he said, you're just as guilty as I am, you hit it.
Yeah.
And then what happened after that?
They get into the fight. They get out of the truck, go to the front of the truck. Mr. Adams, and that ends it. By the time he lands that lick, Densmore's right.
Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. We are talking about the Holly Bobo case today because last week it was a tentative trial date was set for the next suspect in this case, John Dylan Adams. His brother, Zachary Adams, was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape of Holly Bobo. Now his brother will face trial in May of, I believe, May 29th, 2018. So we're going to be able to cover that case when that starts. But really, we're talking about this case today because of the update that we had last week. And joining me now is Adam Sostrin, criminal defense attorney, talking about the case of Holly Bobo. Adam, I just was looking at something in the break, and basically Terry Dickus, who was the lead investigator in this case, he filed an affidavit, and he said after reviewing Mr. Autry's testimony, which we were just watching, he said it's false, that it's not true. And he goes into detail about how if you take what Mr. Autry said by face value, it's impossible for certain people to be at certain places and for certain things to have happened as he said. He's basically calling him a liar. Now, when you have that kind of, that statement, that affidavit, how will that affect the trial of John Dylan Adams if you're putting into question the testimony of Jason Autry?
Well, I mean, he can make any kind of sworn affidavit he likes. The issue is whether or not the defense is going to put him on as a witness, which they're welcome to do in the new trial. I remember in the previous trial, he believed that the offender was actually a known sex offender, a person who was in custody for a rape offense.
Terry Britt.
Terry Britt, correct. He said a number of things. He said with respect to Zachary Adams that the location, his alibi sort of meshed with him being at a gas station because he saw, police cars driving by, which would have put him at that location at the time that Holly Bobo's cell phone was moving the whole time, that the alibi with respect to Mr. Britt sort of didn't seem to work out. So he sort of put his stake in the game early on that he believes that sort of the wrong people are on trial. And I'm not surprised that he made statement to that effect today. And interestingly, he's also an attorney, which I recently learned. So he was the lead investigator, and he's also a lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it. The language that he put in, it's very legally oriented. I can see why. But the question is if you're the defense attorney in this case, I mean, he only filed this, maybe 20 days ago, 10, 15 days ago. I mean, the trial is not expected until May. Do you bring him on as a witness? Will the prosecution really try to impede his credibility here and say that he might be, he's inaccurate with what he's saying, because he's making accusations in this document saying that certain times, certain things are the way it are, and then you have to back that up by facts too. Doesn't it just become complicated?
It does become a little bit complicated, but of course I would want the lead investigator who was on the case from the beginning and what decisions he made and why to testify. I know that it didn't prove successful with respect to the first trial, but assuming there's going to be another trial in this case and there's not going to be a plea, of course I'm putting him on the stand.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, one of the things about this case, there was so much drama because there were so many different players and everybody wanted answers. And one of the arguments that was put forward by Zachary Adams' attorney was that the investigators, they needed someone to pin this crime on. They were looking for her for almost 3 years, and now they needed someone to pinpoint the crime on, and they focused on these individuals. Now, again, is that a smart tactic? I've seen this happen before in other cases where the defense says, the prosecution, the state, investigators, they needed someone to point the finger at, and they took my client. I don't know if that necessarily works here, but what do you make of that kind of argument?
Well, I mean, what else do you say with respect to sort of the determinations and conclusions that the investigator that he's talking about? Of course, maybe you're not going to hone in on that in the closing argument because there's all kinds of statements that have been made by the players in this case, but you can sort of allude to that. You can say something that the state needs somebody to prosecute. Somebody was murdered. This is who the state decided to prosecute. The evidence will show that the lead investigator, in fact, determined that, these people, let's say, or, with respect to Zachary, had a good alibi. This sex offender didn't have a good alibi. The state has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. You can do that for purposes of putting doubt into the minds of the jurors. Maybe you don't want to spend so much time
discussing
it, but at least you sort of put the evidence out there because the only job of the defense attorney is to cast doubt in this case.
We don't have to bash anyone here on the Law and Crime Network, but I am curious to get your opinion. Defense attorney Jennifer Thompson, who represented Zachary Adams, she received some criticism about her handling of the case. We were watching every day. She seemed to have some trouble with certain rules of evidence, sometimes on hearsay, sometimes had some difficulty in the courtroom, particularly with the judge. What did you make of her handling of this case, the Zachary Adams case?
I'm not going to come down on another defense attorney, but I will say, the more you do this, the better you get at it. I've been in court on multiple occasions where I've been schooled by a judge. I've been schooled by a judge in front of a jury, and it is the worst, most humiliating experience. It's even humiliating when there's not a trial, and you're just there, and there's a hearing, and he makes fun of you in front of the audience. These are the things that we have to deal with as defense attorneys. Will she get better with evidence? She will. Was she successful in the case? She wasn't. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
What's interesting is not only was she viewed by the entire courtroom, but everyone here on the Law and Crime Network, and everybody was watching it. So, she did receive some criticism. Again, you don't have to bash anybody, but I'm curious. If you're Zachary Adams, do you think you might have an opportunity for an ineffective assistance of counsel claim, or is that a little too strong? Because it's not that she didn't do her job properly and didn't provide the proper service, but perhaps she wasn't as schooled in the rules of evidence as possible. Or do you think he might actually have an outlet there?
If there were certain objections that weren't made that would have made a difference in the outcome, only in that sense would it be impossible to get an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. The fact that she showed up every day, the fact that it clearly, it was clear that she did her homework in this case, it's very unlikely that you're going to get something set aside for ineffective assistance of counsel. But there's all sorts of ways defense attorneys can get in trouble. They can make an objection without federalizing the objection, and that could be a problem. It could just be a state-based objection. There's so many bases that we have to cover as defense attorneys, and it's hard to get absolutely everything right. But it's really hard for an attorney to go down on that claim.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, and we can sit here, we can Monday night quarterback everybody and say, oh, this is what should have been happened, this is what you should have done this. But at the same time, she did receive some criticism because of her handling of the case. But it is an interesting question. I am curious, the fact that we now have this upcoming trial of John Dylan Adams. How much will it play for the fact that his brother was convicted in this crime? Does that evidence of that conviction, does that come in to affect the John Dylan Adams case at all? Is that the prosecution going to use that fact? Or can they use that fact?
Well, I would make the argument if I'm the defense attorney, well, someone else got convicted of this, that's not evidence, of course, of your client's guilt in the case. And the only thing that's relevant is whether or not your client is guilty, not whether or not a jury made a different determination. So I would absolutely object to any kind of statement with respect to the conviction of a co-defendant from coming into the trial.
We haven't talked about it yet today, but I am curious. We know that Shane Austin was another suspect in this case. He was going under the ringer for investigations, and we believe he might have had an immunity deal at one point, and he killed himself. He committed suicide. What did you make of that fact in this case?
It's so crazy. Everything about this case is crazy. The fact that they found a body, the people who did it were ginseng hunters. I don't even know what those people are. He would have been another Autry. It's not surprising that other defendants wanted to step forward and say, hey, I want to give the bag away because I don't want to get something really bad. I don't want to get a really bad sentence. What he did was awful. I don't know the reason why he took his life. Could it be related to this case? Sure.
That's what most people think, and that's what adds to the drama of this case. We're going to talk more about the drama of this case in a little bit, Adam, so stick around. We are going to show a little bit more testimony of Jason Autry from the Zachary Adams case, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more with Adam about some other developments as we wait for the John Dylan Adams case in a few months. Again, he is also charged in connection with the disappearance, the kidnapping, the rape, and the of young 20-year-old nursing student Holly Bobo. This case out of Tennessee, really horrifying, very crazy, as Mr. Sostrin just explained. A lot of interesting details, so we will come back and talk about it with Adam. But in the meantime, here is some more testimony from Jason Autry.
641 and 40 in a pine thicket.
And what happened?
I got there early first. Jack and Dylan pulled in behind me in a extended cab, Chevrolet pickup. Jack come to the front seat of the car, sat down. I handed him a meth pipe. I asked him a question. I said, "What'd you do with that girl?" And he said, "We throwed her out near Kelly Ridge." He said, "That's not the reason I'm here today." He said, "I'm here over Dylan. Dylan hadn't been to bed. He won't stop running his damn mouth about this shit. He's gonna get us in trouble."
And when he told you that, how did you respond?
I asked him what he wanted done.
Okay. Tell the jury what was said.
He said his grandpa Dick would probably pass in a few years, and if I'd kill Dylan, that he'd give me a portion of the money and let me live in one of the houses. I did not make an agreement. I told him, I said, "It's something I need to think about, and I'm not prepared to do this today."
Did he indicate to you how he wanted it done or when he wanted it done?
He did not.
And when you said that to him, what did he say?
He told me if I decided to do that, to let him know. And I told him, I said, "When I get done with that, you'll probably be next."
Meaning what?
Meaning I was going to kill him too.
And what did he say or do after you said that to him?
He hit the pipe a few times, and I asked him, I said, what's going on with Shane? And he said, I hadn't seen him. And I said, well, I'm fixing to go visit him.
All right, let me stop just a minute. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard testimony that the defendant, Zachary Adams, allegedly attempted to engage this witness to harm Dylan Adams, as well as other potential bad acts. You may not consider such things, such testimony to prove his disposition to commit the crime for which he is on trial, but rather the testimony may only be considered by you for the limited purpose of determining whether it provides the complete story of the crime. That is, whether such testimony and the charged offenses are logically related or connected so that the testimony of the other tends to prove the one charged or is necessary for a complete account thereof. Okay.
Why did you make the statement that you did, Zach Adams, that if you decided to do it, that he'd be next?
I felt like after I'd sat and evaluated the situation and the circumstances, the reality and the scope of the situation that fell on me, I felt like in my heart that he should have notified me and let me know before you bring me into a situation like that. Meaning the day that I called trying to set up and buy the morphine and you said you need to see me, you should have said you had a dead body there. Or I felt that in my heart. I felt that I was brought into that. And I felt it. That's what I felt.
You asked about Shane and then made the statement that you were going to go check on him. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so did you do that?
I left there and stopped at the store, Dottie's, and got 2 beers, 2 quarts of Bud Light. I proceeded to Shane's house where I ran into a roadblock at 790 Pew Road. The officer was Jeremy Inman. I pulled up. He looked in the car and seen the alcohol, and he said, Jason, he said, there's search parties and shit all over the place down through there. He looks through the car, to the front, PT Cruiser, looks in the back in the hatchback, and he said, you're going to need to be careful if you're going to drive through there drinking. And I left, went to Shane's house.
And that's the trailer on Yellow Springs Road.
30 Yellow Springs Road.
Is that the first time you had been back to the trailer since?
That's the first time I had been around any of them or back to Decatur County since the 13th.
All right. Now, you're not going to be able to say what Shane said, but I want you to describe what you did when you got to his trailer and what you observed.
When I got to the trailer, he was highly inebriated. And he said that, no, I can't say.
Right. So
He was highly inebriated, and I took him away from that situation. There was,
All right, we're talking about Shane.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
Were the search parties all in and around where his trailer was, the road in front of his trailer, the woods?
there was maybe a command post set up at Yellow Springs Church, and people just everywhere in that area.
And again, you can't say what he said, but you can describe his demeanor for the jury. Was he agitated? Was he calm? Was he concerned? How would you describe his demeanor?
Frantic.
Frantic. Okay, as a result, because you went there to check on him, right?
That's correct.
So as a result of pulling, you yourself passing a roadblock, pulling in and seeing all the search parties, you said you wanted to take him away from that situation.
I did.
So what'd you do?
I loaded him in, got him into the PT Cruiser, and left that general location. I noticed as we were going down the road, when I would turn or hit the brakes, that he would go over, nod out, and he'd dash. I was having to catch him with my hand. So I thought, I'll take him and feed him. At that time, I took him to Johnny's Bar and Grill and fed him.
During the course of your meal with him, did he at any time, or did his demeanor change? Did he calm down? Did he sober up? Did you become less concerned?
You know, we were in a bar and he was not drinking, so he naturally sobered up a little bit, but there was numerous people in the bar. And we left there and went to another bar where he did kind of sober up after he eat, but he never really come to just complete sobriety.
Again, not asking what he said, did you have a conversation with him about what had happened to Holly?
I did not.
Not that night?
Not that night.
Okay. So after taking him to eat and then to another bar, did you take him back home?
I did.
Okay.
I did, and at that time, dropped him off, went back to 310 Benco Hills to Angela's house.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the conversation that you had with Zach.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. You're watching Jason Autry, the key witness in the Holly Bobo case, the Zachary Adams case out of Tennessee, when he took the stand a few months back in that case, which resulted in Zachary Adams being found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape of 20-year-old Holly Bobo, a nursing student from Tennessee. I'm here with criminal defense attorney Adam Sostrin dissecting this case because it was announced last week that another person in connection with this crime, John Dylan Adams, the brother of Zachary Adams, will be put on trial in May 29th. And so, Adam, I'm watching this testimony and I can't help but bring up the fact there was a key point in Jason Autry's testimony where he talked about the fact that Zachary Adams wanted to hire him to kill his brother, John Dylan Adams, who will be on trial. Now, this idea that one brother is trying to hire Mr. Autry to kill his other brother, what did you make of that when that revelation came to fruition, when that revelation was revealed to everybody?
Well, it's my understanding that he's even threatened, I think, the life of his mother, or he shot his mother in the leg or something like that. So Zachary's definitely a loose cannon, which might also go into the fact that, well, it doesn't make it's not that much of a surprise, let's see, that the brother is talking to authorities because maybe he's afraid of Zachary. I don't know. It's just it's a strange familial kind of thing. But that's what's happening in this Tennessee trial.
Do you think that fact will come up in the John Dylan Adams case?
Yeah, it shows potential, let's say, bias from any kind of statements with respect to that John Dylan made. It also shows the fact that this person is sort of he's a loose gun. But really, what is the relevance of that to John Dylan Adams's culpability in this specific case? Doesn't seem to be that relevant.
Well, what's interesting about that is you have this guy who is committing these crimes, and the idea that he's capable of anything, it kind of shows you the mindset of this individual. Now, I have to tell you, one of the interesting parts of Jason Autry's testimony is that he was willing to do anything because of this drug community. In order to get the proper drugs, the meth that he was involved with, he was willing to, bury a body. He was willing to kill this man's brother. And that kind of gives you a sense, and we talked about it a little bit earlier when we had Burton Staggs on, it's tough for people who watch this trial that are not within that community to understand what this drug culture is like and what this community is like. So how important is it for people who watch this trial to understand that there is a disease out there, that there really is a sickness in that community? And when you see this kind of drug culture, I mean, obviously not everyone who's in that culture is a murderer, but the idea is the people who are in that culture, maybe the rules are a little bit different. And how important is that for people to understand when they view this case?
Well, I mean, I think certainly they look at the case as a case involving drug dealers and drug users, and sort of the problem with methamphetamines in this country. It's absolutely terrible, and it's terrible what lengths people will go to. But again, the real issue was, what kind of criminal culpability do we have with brother in this case going forward? And even if there's going to be a trial at all, like I said, I think that there's a chance there might be some plea bargaining beforehand, and this case might never see the light of day.
Adam, one of the things that brought down Zachary Adams, and I don't know if it's going to apply to John Dylan Adams, is that according to Mr. Autry and other people, Zachary Adams just shot his mouth off. He kept bragging about his involvement in this crime and making threats about other people, in basically veiled threats that showed that he was involved in the Holly Bobo crime. And there was a whole series of things that he said that seemed to implicate him. What did you think about that? I mean, literally, he kept speaking about that he was involved in this crime and threatening people and saying, you'll end up like this person. So I thought that was really his downfall, or at least one of the reasons for his downfall.
Well, I mean, isn't that the problem with so many of gang cases, or any of these very serious homicides that you see, that people sort of run their mouth? And in fact, that's what the initial investigator said. He says, what's wrong with these people? Zach Adams keeps talking. So they're not there because of how smart they are. They're there because they've done horrible acts, and frankly, they're pretty stupid in what they're doing, what they think is covering their tracks, but it's not at all. It's just sort of shedding light on all the horrible things that they've done and the things that they're capable of.
As we await for that trial to begin of John Dylan Adams in the next few months, do you see any possibility that he might not face the same fate as his brother, that he might not be as complicit in this crime, or maybe not for everything that his brother was charged with? I mean, he hasn't with pulling the trigger to kill Miss Bobo. No, but he has been involved, in terms of the rape and the abduction, the disposal of the body. Do you see there's any chance for him to maybe get off completely, or maybe not face the same face?
Well, the issue with, some of these felony murders is you commit a crime and it's foreseeable that, your conduct will lead to the death of another. And obviously a forcible rape, it is foreseable that somebody could die. It is foreseeable. You have multiple actors there, family members, friends, person who just killed themselves, that they somehow things could go really bad and somebody could die. I don't think he escapes anything. Again, if I'm his attorney, I want to try to get some kind of plea bargain here. And of course, this all has to do with how good Autry's statement is, how damning it's going to be with respect to Brother John.
What's interesting also is the fact that Mr. Autry, we usually cover cases here where there's maybe one defendant, or again, like the case we're covering tomorrow, there's multiple defendants, but they're all tried at the same time. When you have defendants that are tried separately, is there any way you could take something that happened in one trial, really investigate it, try to discredit it so it can't be used in the next trial? For example, as we talked about earlier, there's an affidavit from the lead investigator in this case who's basically saying that Mr. Autry lied on the stand, that his facts are just not accurate, and you can't believe what he testified to. So in a way, if you're the defense attorney for John Dylan Adams, try to keep that Jason Autry testimony out. Again, is there anything that they could learn from the Zachary Adams case in a way to help their client now?
Well, I'm just assuming it's a given that the defense attorney has had multiple conversations and is in constant communication with the investigator who wrote this affidavit. It is absolutely, let's say, critical to a potential defense in this case if it isn't plea bargained down to something else, or it's also helpful with respect to just plea bargaining in general. Look, we have some sort of a timeline here that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Here's why, and then they can say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to offer your client. These conversations are going on as we speak, no doubt.
I agree with you. Adam Sostrin, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the Holly Bobo case, as well as the case coming tomorrow that we're going to be covering, the case of Laquan Barrow, Gary King, and Michael Smith. I'll talk about that in a minute. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.